Hi, and welcome to the Living Fullness podcast. I'm Stina.
And I'm Father Burns.
And on this episode, we're going to have a conversation about intimate partner violence and the icon of marriage.
If you're new here, we chat about the virtues, relationships, make comments on culture, and we discuss living the Christian life, and we're very grateful to have you with us.
Okay, so a bit of a heavier topic this particular week. We're talking about family separation. I don't know that there's anything more devastating when it comes to family life than family separations. I don't think there's anything more heartbreaking, earth-shattering for the entire family than when a separation happens. And so I think it makes total sense then to avoid it at all costs or as much as possible. And socially speaking, it certainly is in the best interest of society to keep families together. And so it makes sense then that the church has a vested interest in trying to keep marriages intact.
Definitely.
And that interest isn't just because of the economic value that family brings, or even thinking about the health of the children, health and development of the children. It's not purely because of that. It's not even because two people have entered into like a legal contract.
Right.
And maybe even to try and salvage a relationship that has a bit of chemistry and a bit of romance, and because two people made a commitment, but it's because two people actually entered into a covenant with God and to become an icon of the love of God. So the stakes are a lot higher than just a romance falling apart or just a legal contract being broken.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not just about two people then. It's about whose love these two people have now committed to become icons of, and God who is love. Being an icon isn't just about being able to testify to God's love and speak about his love. It's to live that out in every facet of their lives, with every choice that they make from that commitment, from that marriage vows onwards. And that relationship, that marriage becomes a witness then to everyone, including children, but everyone else in society who sees them, of the love that God has for his people.
Absolutely.
And that love, we've done this episode on this a couple of seasons ago. We talked about the love of the bridegroom. That love that the bridegroom has for his people, it never ends. He never stops. There is nothing that actually gets between him and his people.
Right.
And so if that is what marriage is meant to be an icon of, it's a little bit more than society's expectation.
Right, absolutely.
Of what couple relationships look like.
It's not just contractual.
No. So I think sometimes society can look at the church as having these skewed views, almost like the church has some kind of like sadistic way of thinking that two people who are suffering must stay together suffering, somehow the church gets some kind of joy out of that, or that the church thinks that, two people just, if they don't like each other too bad, they have to continue to try and like each other anyway, or that somehow the church is backwards, or that even that the church would think that violence is somehow acceptable in the case of marriage. None of those things are accurate.
No.
So when it comes then to divorce, I think we have to think about what is actually conveyed. Like even when we think about the marriage vows, it's till death do us part.
Correct.
It's not till divorce do us part.
No.
It's till death do us part. And also what God has joined, let no man put asunder. So if it has everything to do with this covenant with God, then trying something like a divorce almost looks like it's trying to say that a covenant can be broken, which is not possible.
Right.
It's impossible to break a covenant with God.
Yep.
And yet all a divorce then goes on to say is we're pretending that we've been able to break this covenant.
Right.
In the eyes of the church, though, that's not been able to take place.
Exactly.
So for the sake of this conversation, I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So we're going to move forward talking about separation, not speaking about divorce, and we're not speaking about annulments either.
No. I think it's also important to say that this conversation will probably focus a little bit on the violence aspect of separation.
Yeah.
And what does it look like in a Christian context for that to sort of take place? So now it would be remiss of me to say that in considering annulments, the church does actually look at domestic violence as a factor in whether or not both parties actually gave their consent on the day of their wedding, bearing in mind that an annulment is not Catholic divorce. It is a statement that there was never a marriage in the first place.
Yeah.
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 So
yeah, having said all of that, all of the caveats that are in place for this particular episode as we move forward, just also bearing in mind that the church does understand that there will be circumstances of safety and well-being where a separation may need to take place between a husband and a wife. And one of those cases, like you said, could be family and domestic violence. So in this episode, as we talk about separation, again, we're not talking about annulments, we're not talking about divorce. This is the kind of separation we're talking about in the context of family violence.
Right. All right, so one of the important documents of the church is called the Code of Canon Law, Codex Iuri Canonici or something like that, who knows? I should probably know. Codex Iuris Canonici, Code of Canon Law. And it's a name for church law stemming from a Greek word, canon, which means sort of a straight measuring rod. The idea being that the church law is well measured, that it sort of responds to reality and to the circumstances of people's lives. And for that reason, canon law often is evolving as well. It's something that shifts and changes according to the needs of given situations. There are some canons that always remain fairly similar, particularly if they're based on divine law. But there are other ones that do shift and change over time. So now in Canon 1153, paragraph 1, it says that if either of the spouses cause grave mental or physical danger to the other spouse or to the offspring, or otherwise renders common life too difficult, that that spouse gives the other a legitimate cause for leaving, either by decree of the local ordinary, which is another word for a bishop or a vicar general, depending on who's available, or even by his or her own authority. So by virtue of their own sort of decision-making, right? Particularly if there is danger in delay, right? So in other words, if you're in danger because of domestic violence, don't wait to get permission from the bishop, just leave, right?
Yeah.
Now, canon law here is based on sound moral principles, the principle being that where there is the threat of harm, there is the right to self-defense and to self-preservation. So that's the moral basis upon which this is placed.
Yeah.
There are certain attitudes that I think which can support a problematic vision of marriage and perhaps even allow for domestic violence to flourish. So I'm thinking in particular of Misinterpretations of Ephesians chapter 5.
Okay.
Where a wife is told to obey her husband.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, in this misinterpretation, the husband is seen as God with a little g, whose will is unquestionable. And this gives rise to the possibility of all kinds of abuse: mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, physical, probably other kinds that I don't know about. But it gives rise to a manifold number of abuses. And this is not the meaning of Ephesians 5. This is a complete distortion. The true meaning is what's called mutual subjugation, right? And it's why this passage begins with, be subject to one another, be subject to one another. Do I need to say it a third time? I mean, be subject to one another in obedience to Christ. So the wife, a wife is subject in obedience. What does this mean? Ob audire, two words joined together to form the word obedience. It means to listen or to hear. She is called to listen and to support her husband in his leadership of the family, to remind him of who he is meant to be, to hear and to listen when lies come up.
Yes.
And to challenge those.
Yeah.
To hear where he wants to lead the family, where he's desiring to lead the family, and to, in general, respond and be supportive. And being supportive sometimes means to lend challenge, right? So obedience here does not mean blind subjection. Obedience means to hear and to respond out of love. Simultaneously, the man is subject to the woman in love. That is, he is to die for her. He is to die for her every day, not just physically to die for her, but to die for her in such a way that he'll die to himself, that he'll let go of his pride, that he'll let go of a need to be right all the time and hear the wisdom that she has to offer. This is that he'll die to his sins and to the base nature that stops from a loving relationship being formed. He'll die to control issues. He'll die to all that stuff, right? So essentially, both must love each other. And because men and women are different, that love will be expressed in a complementary manner. The man must die to himself. The woman must die to herself. And they'll do this in different ways. The woman will die to herself to support the leadership of her husband, the man to support and heed the dreams and heart and wisdom of his wife. In this way, it's a bit like a dance, right? It's in ballroom dancing, the man provides a frame with his body for that the woman can safely push off of. He becomes aware of where she's comfortable going and leads her in that direction, and she trusts his leadership. It's a dance, right? And so in this way, both husband and wife image the love of the cross to each other.
Yeah. I've seen so many couples who've come in to my space, not necessarily for couples work, but who come in for different needs they might have. And I hear, when I have my sessions with them and I hear their stories, I hear this horrific levels of abuse that they've experienced, and all of those, different forms that you talked about before, whether that be physical or emotional or mental or spiritual or financial, or sexual or spiritual. Like there's so many different kinds, and not all of them are to the highest of intensities, but all sorts of different levels. And what's really sad is that the couples themselves have normalized it.
Right.
So many couples normalize their behavior and kind of take it as, well, this is just my lot in life. Or, oh, well, we just get on with it anyway. Like this is just part of the flaw of the other person, and we just, we get on with it. And even the ones who know that something isn't quite right, or who could even muster the ability to say, I know this is a kind of abuse. I know that, this is a bit of a power struggle here, will often say, but I'm going to go with it anyway because I'm a Christian and my church would frown upon this kind of separation. Right. Or in the case of generally mothers, but not always, in the case of mothers, I also hear a lot of the women say, but I can't afford to raise these children on my own. I'll be completely unable to provide for these children. So I'm better off staying here in this unsafe environment in order for my children and I to have a roof over our head.
Right.
That is so sad.
That is terribly sad.
So sad.
And can I say that the first that you mentioned, that, my church would frown upon it, unfortunately, that is often reinforced by the judgments of others, where people have experienced a judgmental attitude, and are like, well, I'll be judged. I'll be treated this way or that, and so to those that are prone to judgment within our church, could I put the challenge out of, you don't know. You're not God, so just reserve. And to those who are frightened of judgment, can I just say, look, the only judgment that we need to even be considering is the judgment of the Lord. So just leave it in his hands and don't worry about what anyone else is judging you for. Yeah.
Don't let that stop you in this.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And what tends to happen with these couples is that because they've kind of normalized this kind of behavior, they've spent years with either one or both of them sitting in this kind of disenfranchised position in their relationship, or have brought children into their relationship without having an adequate appreciation of their own dignity and worth, and or nor of their spouse. And so those couples become really limited in the kinds of fruits that they're able to bear through that marriage because of all of this negative stuff and violence and that have kind of become part and parcel of their relationship. Whereas the reality is, in order for a marriage to be a true icon of God and the covenant that we spoke about before, it needs to look like that husband and wife from Ephesians that you described before, that mutual service and sacrifice for each other. And so when the couple kind of misses the mark in that regard, it's on the couple to do what they have to realign their targets so that they're both heading towards the same direction again. Because at the end of the day, isn't that what marriage is for, is to be able to help each other get to heaven?
Right.
So if violence has started to come up in the relationship, this relationship isn't moving towards heaven now. At least for one person, it's definitely not moving towards heaven. So for the both, something needs to shift and change for this relationship, for the marriage as a whole to continue to move towards heaven.
Yeah.
And yet, so even knowing all of this, somehow we seem to think that when abuse and violence kind of gets involved, the church kind of turns a blind eye or anticipates that the only person in the marriage who needs to realign the targets, generally being the victim, is the person who has to make all of the accommodations for the behavior. You have to wait it out. You have to give another chance, another chance, another chance, another chance, another chance. Oh, they didn't mean it. There's all of this other stuff. And that may be true. Maybe there is another chance to be given. Maybe the other person is trying. Maybe there is, but that's not the blanket rule for everyone, that you stay in an unsafe environment perpetually.
Right.
Or indefinitely. That's not the church's guidelines.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So in the case of where, a spouse who might be struggling with alcoholism, for example, or addiction to drugs, or starts using any kind of repetitive violence towards his or her spouse, the church expects the marriage to realign itself to be the icon that it promised to try and live out in this life, and to use every measure that's available to them to make that a reality.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that means separating.
Yeah.
That means having to take space in order to go, what went wrong?
Yep.
Okay, what's missing? Who can we seek out that can help? Either me as an individual or us as a couple.
Yeah.
And especially if you have children involved.
Yeah.
What do we need to do to create safety now for our children's sake?
Yes.
So that could be support groups. That could be rehab. That could be therapy. That could be seeking out your pastor. That could be finding community. That could be all of the above.
Absolutely.
But the church expects the couple to do something in this space.
Right. I've worked with people who've been the subject of abusive households, and they often need to hear from a pastor that it's okay to separate. Confirmation that I'm very, very happy to give, along with the advice that they take this time to grow and to feel safe again, and to pray for their husbands or wives, depending what's going on the journey of recovery. And now that said, where there is a recidivistic lapse in any kind of abuse, it may be necessary to separate permanently. That could be a reality that you must contend with, is that if there's a situation where the abuse continues to return, where there is no actual change or shift of behavior, but in fact there's the same old controlling methods come back, the same abusive circumstances raise their heads again. Well, that's where I think a permanent separation is necessary, and canon law talks about that. It talks about where permanent separations are necessary to speak to the ordinary, to speak to the bishop, and to have his advice and to explain the situation to him. And yeah. So
one of the common reasons that I hear for couples, generally women, not separating when there's violence involved, is either because of what we said before, a sense of judgment from community, their church community, or rejection, outright rejection from their church community, or potentially even their family as well, if they were to separate. But the other is the effect that it might have on the children. So I think we've done an extraordinary marketing campaign over the years of trying to educate families on the importance of, as far as possible, a marriage staying intact for the health and well-being of the children.
Yes.
So that both parents are under the same household, under the same roof, in the same household for the sake of the children.
Yeah.
What we've failed to educate on, though, is the devastating impact that children experience from living under the same roof as violence. So what we have is people who have been misinformed, thinking it is better for my child that I stay in this relationship with my husband or wife who is abusive towards me and or towards the children, because it's better for my children to see that we're still together,
right,
than for my children and I to be removed from this husband or wife who's being abusive and have a safe home, but where mum and dad are separated.
Yeah.
Which is actually just missed the mark.
It completely misses the mark.
The mark, because for children, it's much better for children to actually see a mum and dad who's separated, but have a safe home, where they can have a safe relationship with both mum and dad.
Yes.
That is much better for them, even in the case where there isn't physical violence. That's the other piece. The other piece for violence is we think only physical violence is bad, or sometimes even the screaming kind of verbal violence is bad. Sexual violence we would say is bad. But the other types of violence, like that's not really violence, like being manipulative, being controlling, that's not really, that's still violence.
It's a
and
violation,
that's still detrimental.
right?
It's still detrimental to children's development. Children have a habit of seeing happiness of their parents reflected as being a representative of how they behave in the household.
Yes.
So they have a tendency towards, if mum and dad is upset, did I do something wrong? Are they upset with me? So when it comes to separation, children, and in violence, it's often the case that children think they are the reason for the separation.
Yes.
So it's even more important that we show children that what's happening between mum and dad is not a result of them. So if there's violence happening in the home and it's not being addressed, children will go to think this mum and dad must be fighting because of me.
Right.
I must behave
I'm
much
the
better.
cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I must shift and change who I am to accommodate for mum and dad so that we can keep the peace in the household.
Right.
But it also means if and when there is a separation, it also means that these children walk away with a lot of guilt, especially if that separation hasn't happened and they've grown on to be an adult and they've lived under the same roof and they've known the only reason they didn't separate, mum and dad didn't separate, is because they wanted the best for them. That's a lot of guilt that's now sitting on a child who's grown into an adult who now has to process decisions that were made by mum and dad because they were too afraid for whatever reason, too afraid to make an adjustment. And that still has an effect on children.
Yes. Yeah.
We also tend to see developmental regression as well. We can see milestones. You can see, milestones that maybe children hit a while ago now seem to be their norm when you thought they were much further along.
Yeah, sure.
For really young children or even, primary school age children, bedwetting.
Yep.
What's happening there? Hiding under their beds, needing lights of a night time when they'd moved past these, needing, soft toys to cuddle with, and they've moved past all of that.
Heading back to,
can be a form of regression. In teenagers, we can see aggression coming out as well because they just don't know how to cope with the emotions that are coming up for them. Children can also grow up believing that they have to solve their own problems because that was what was modeled for them. Parents who didn't seek support elsewhere and had to solve it, keep it quiet even.
Yep.
Don't share it with anyone else. There could be that silence factor as well.
Right.
All of those can be really unhelpful. And of course, when it comes to being a witness of marriage, that's also what's being passed on. Children also grow up to believe that this must be what marriage is. And I think that is part of the fear of why some couples choose to stay together, is they don't want to pass on what it looks like, what marriage looks like, i.e. literally that marriages break. They don't want to pass on that. But I don't think the alternative of marriages are violent is something that we want to pass on either.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right. And it's if there's that unhappiness in the home where there is that level of abuse, whatever the abuse might be, whether you like it or not, you're already passing on what marriage is like. That's the honest truth, right? Is that just because you've stayed together doesn't mean that you've passed on what it means to be happily married.
No, yeah.
It's
Because children have never observed any other kind of marriage.
Exactly.
They've only lived in the one household.
Exactly.
They've only experienced one marriage.
That's right.
Yeah. Whether it be a great one or one that misses the mark, that's the one
right.
they're going to.
It's better to take that opportunity to go, hey, let's separate. Let's do this for the sake of the kids, and let's get ourselves sorted out.
Because at least then you show children that actually marriages are hard.
Yeah.
Relationships are hard.
Yeah.
They take work.
Yeah.
But also they're possible because here's two people who are willing to try everything.
100%. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so marriages should also be modeling that kind of like healthy maturation, which includes being able to uphold dignity and worth of the person for yourself and the other. And so in case of violence, abuse, control and so on, one or both people have been unable to create that kind of marriage that you've actually been called into and committed to being. And that may only be for this point in time.
Yep.
It may be possible that there is a way to come back from that it is possible to repair the relationship, but there's only one way to find out if that's the case.
Yes.
That marriage needs to go and find support.
That's right.
Needs to go and find other people, professionals, pastors, community who can speak into it to help heal what's been wounded there.
Yeah.
And it's very possible that husband and wife may need two different things on that healing journey. It may not be the same thing.
Yep.
Parts of it may be couples work, maybe, but there could be two very different things that each person needs. But it's really essential that that couple go and find what is available out there to help them. And for those who might be in the situation where you're experiencing violence at the hands of your spouse, that's a really tough situation to be in. It's a really helpless situation to be in, to be experiencing that level of loss of power. But it is, if you're the only person who can see that there is unhelpful things going on, unhealthy things going on in this relationship, then you're the only person who can do something about it in the start.
Yep.
You're the only person who can do something about it to start the wheels turning. So it may be on you to approach your spouse and say, look, I've had enough of this. We can't keep doing this. This isn't healthy for you and me. It's not healthy for our children. This is not what we committed to when we exchanged vows, when we made those promises. We can do better than this.
Yes.
How about we go and get the support that we need, because together we're not able to create a safe home anymore. Yeah. We need help so that we can recreate that safe home.
Yep.
And if it's too unsafe for you to go to your spouse and say that, if you know that if you were to do that, that's going to cause another event, another series of abuses to occur, don't go to your spouse with it. Go to a professional with that.
Yes.
Go to someone and say to them, this is my situation.
Yeah.
This is what I'm experiencing. I can't go to my spouse and say this to my spouse because I know that's going to create another episode of violence.
Well, absolutely.
I'm coming to you to ask you for your help. What can I do? And there may be other supports that can be put in place to help your spouse to hear what they weren't able to hear from you.
Yep. Sometimes the church is seen to be, as you said earlier, seen to be the bad guy. right? That keeps a victim stuck in a place of violence. And so the argument goes something like, well, in the case of risk to life, it's okay to break the rules and therefore it's okay to separate. For the church, separation in this context is not breaking the rules. It's not a breaking of the law. The law allows for separation in this context to ensure safety both of the spouses and of children, or offspring, as canon law uses the term. This does not speak to the covenant of marriage, right? The covenant of marriage remains intact until it is otherwise found that it's not, right? It speaks to the possibility of separating for the sake of the individuals and of children out of charity and for all involved in the marriage, for growth and conversion to occur essentially, right? So yeah, that's I think it's an important place to sort of go, that separation is permitted in these circumstances, and necessary.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
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 So it's a bit of a heavy episode.
Yeah.
We're aware this was an episode that was requested. So we wanted to be able to meet that need, and we hope that it's done that. If you've got questions though, please send them in.
Please do.
Please contact either Padre or myself. If there is anything here that didn't make sense to you or you have questions about it, please do. And if you need to speak to someone, please reach out. Reach out to your pastors, reach out to your priests. They can put you in touch with people, the right people. So don't be afraid to speak up.
If at any stage you find yourself in fear of your life, or please immediately contact emergency services, 000, and don't hesitate to do so.
Yeah. All right, Padre, to end on a bit of a lighter note, because it is a bit heavy.
Sure.
A truth, beauty and goodness for the week.
I visited a hospital. Gosh, that doesn't sound too light, does it?
No,
I visited.
But if there's a truth, beauty and goodness,
There's a truth, beauty, and goodness, and I visited a hospital, and I visited a number of patients who had requested to see a priest. I have a guy, a deacon, who goes in before me. His name is actually John the Baptist, which I find hilarious because he goes ahead of me, and he collects the names of people who'd like to see a priest. And so I've gone in and seen a bunch of people, and it's always a precious moment to spend time with people who are sick, who are ailing, just to be able to be with them a while, and particularly for people who've been in hospital for a long time. It's a real, it's really beautiful just to spend that time with them, hear them talk, and sometimes even minister to them. It's funny the amount of times you hear confessions in the most unideal circumstances.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. You've got doctors over here and this one over here, and you're sort of huddled in a corner going, now keep your voice really, really low. And it's just, unideal circumstances, but here we are.
Yeah.
So, but very precious moments. So,
beautiful.
How about yourself, Stina?
For me, it is a Spotify playlist. So Virtue Ministry has a Spotify playlist that you can go and check out if you like. We can put the link in the show notes so you can check those out. But I've added a couple of songs to it recently that I've just been like bopping along to. They've been great car ride kind of songs and cooking in the kitchen and dancing in the kitchen type of songs. So go and check it out if you like.
Beautiful. Very good.
Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode. We will catch you again next week. But until then, know of our love and prayers.
God bless.